In this book, a karate guy tries to teach you boxing. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and I talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject of this book review is Lessons from the Western Warrior, published in 1987, and the author is Fred Neff. Now, I couldn't find a whole lot about Mr. Neff outside of what was written in his books. According to those biographies, he was a 5th degree black belt in karate. He's also got experience in various other martial arts. In the cover for this book, he says he is a scholar and practitioner of Western fighting arts. So am I. We're going to get to that. The book begins with an introduction into Western martial arts. It talks about various styles over the years, including things like boxing, pankration, savate. It's very broad and I would say a little bit inaccurate, but it's an okay introduction. Chapter 1 is sort of in a question and answer format, which I think is a very beneficial format. Among the topics that he covers are what sort of sparring equipment to use, how to deal with bullies, things like basic fighting principles like, try to keep calm and aim for weak spots. And it does include a chart of weak points. Chapter 2 is short. It's basically some stretches and push-ups. There's your physical conditioning section of this book. Chapter 3 is on movement, which includes things like stance, some basic footwork, and some vague and unnamed upper body movements. He will discuss upper body movements, but in this section, even though we're demonstrating things like, ducks and slips, they are not being given names at this time. The next two chapters, chapters 4 and 5, cover offense. It includes basic boxing punches as well as 2 kicks, including a knee kick and a front kick, which he doesn't really justify where those come from in the Western martial arts, but here we are. Chapter 6 is on dodging and blocks. Again, we get into some upper body movements. These are not named the way that most boxing movements would be named. That's a little suspect. The blocks that he's showing very much seem like karate blocks. And one could say that, well, these things existed in boxing during the early bare knuckle days and a little bit in the transition into the gloved era. Nobody in the 80s would be showing blocks like this from Western martial arts, from boxing. This is pretty suspect. Chapter 7 is where we get into combinations. These are mostly punching combinations. This is where Mr. Neff's karate background sort of rears its head again, because as he's throwing punches, whereas a boxer would bring his hands back to an on-guard position, we see him dropping his hands as he's demonstrating the punches here. Chapter 7 is where we get into wrestling/grappling, because there are some maneuvers that I'm not sure would be found in a wrestling environment, but they are still so-called soft martial arts like grappling. Included in here are a few basic wrestling throws, like we get the fireman's carry, we get a double leg takedown. We get some stuff like fighting from the knees. These will include like wrestling style turnovers and breakdowns. And we get some escapes from mount. And okay, in wrestling, there is such a thing as a bridge, and that's what's used a lot here, but yeah, it's still suspect to me. I will note that he has an unnamed individual who appears to have a wrestling background who's demonstrating most of the actual wrestling moves in here. The next chapter, chapter 9, talks about how to deal with attackers of different sizes and different strategies, like, counter punchers or power punchers. This is common in Mr. Neff's books. I think that they generally do a pretty good job of offering some insight into that, whereas most other books at the time wouldn't really have strategy against specific opponents. And finally, we get a very brief, basically one-page front and back, Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is on training methodology, basically, some training tips. Things like don't make contact with your partner unless they agree with it. Things like try to avoid flashy moves like you'd see in movies. Again, a lot of it's pretty good advice. As far as the pros go, I do like the format. It's very progressive. I like the question and answer style section. I like the section on strategy and the section on training tips. It will also cover a broader array of situations than one might typically find. So again, we have escapes from mount, which are not necessarily common in all books. We also have, standing strikes, things like that. So, it's not just how to throw punches and kicks. It's not just here's a couple of wrestling moves. There is a little bit of a variety to what we get. As far as the cons go, as I've mentioned straight from the beginning, there's a lot of this that doesn't really feel authentic to Western martial arts. Again, he brings in somebody else to demo the wrestling moves, okay, but there's not really any rhyme or reason for picking those wrestling moves except, like, here's a couple of signature Western wrestling moves. The boxing, as someone who has been a student of boxing since about 2005, no, just no. That's really all I got to say about that. There's other minor nitpicks. The conditioning section is very brief, and it's just basically, again, a couple of stretches and, here's push-ups against the wall. Okay, that's there should be more. Okay, and as far as recommendations go, if you find this book and you find it for cheap and you want to get a taste of boxing style punches and a few wrestling moves, then go ahead and pick it up. Since 1987, we've had a breadth of better books. I mean, even prior to 1987, we had better books on boxing. We had better books on wrestling. We had better books on self-defense. And now, since especially the advent of mixed martial arts, if you want to see a combination of boxing, wrestling, non-wrestling ground fighting, we got that. It's all over the place. I got it because I sort of had fond nostalgic memories of checking out Mr. Neff's books in a library, and I remembered them fondly, and I wanted to get them, and now I have them. It would be very difficult for me to recommend this book on any of the subjects that it intends to present. While I have mentioned that it is not authentic to the boxing that I'm familiar with, that I have cataloged in these boxing books, it is okay for talking about some basic punches. Again, you got a couple of wrestling breakdowns and turnovers. It will give one an idea of what to do if they find themselves in a scramble and their opponent is on their hands and knees. It has some useful stuff. But again, it's difficult for me to recommend it as a primary source for anything. And I hate to sort of leave things on that note, but it's just, like I said, we have better books. We have better books on any subject this claims to cover. A lot of them can be found for free on PDF when it comes to the boxing and wrestling stuff. I appreciate Mr. Neff giving his best. I need to be honest and say that this book falls short of doing what it seems to set out to do. Again, it's got some good sections, but on the whole, not that great. That's all I have for this week. If you'd like to help support the channel, or if you have a suggestion for another book for me to review, please consider donating to my Ko-fi account. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. And thanks for following along with me, and I'll see you guys later.